questions. First of all, I just want to welcome again Admiral Bennett for taking the time out of her busy schedule in flying down from Ottawa just hours ago to join us here today. And I prepared some questions ahead of time, and Admiral Bennett has seen them, so I don't believe in ambushing anybody. But I'm also going to try and make a few linkages to maybe some of the points raised earlier in the day, particularly for your benefit because you weren't able to be here all day with us. One of the things that we talked about very early on in the day were the issues of women's representation. And in a sense, that's not just a military problem. I think it's a security sector challenge more broadly. And there's an issue, I think, that's not just a representation issue, but it's also a reflection, I think, of a divide in civil-military relations, and I think that was brought up. You have been in the Canadian Armed Forces for more than 4 decades. I'm outing you here.
That's okay.
I said to both Dan and the Admiral, I said, I haven't done anything for more than 4 decades except be alive. But given your career as a naval officer in particular, can you reflect on the cultural shifts that have occurred within the organization during your career, and how does this mirror or not, and this kind of goes to the civil-military relations piece, the same shifts in Canadian society?
So let me start by thanking you for this opportunity. You rescued me from my duties in Ottawa. It's always more fun to come here. And I apologize for not being able to be here for the panel, but I'm delighted that Chief Warrant Officer Belanger was able to represent me and the work that we're doing. Let me start even before my career, that when you look at Canadian history, women in the service or women affiliated with the military or in non-traditional roles have actually changed the course of history, in particular in Canada. And so I have a lot of pioneers to thank. Women have served in a capacity with the military since 1885, and even before that, although they weren't able to serve in the military or in uniform. But when you look at the women's services through the wartime years, what Canadian women did working outside the home, in farms and factories, rising to the challenge, it's pretty incredible that set into motion a momentum for those of us, not just those who serve in uniform, but those of us across our society. So I think that there has been a significant amount of change over the course of women in Canadian society. And it's interesting now that I have more water astern of me than ahead for the naval officers in the room. Looking back, when I joined, society was very different. So I joined in the mid-70s, actually 1975. For those of you that weren't born yet, that was quite a while ago. But when I joined, and when I tell my story, the women who are currently serving sort of laugh, and they always say, why did you put up with that? When I joined, women could not serve at sea. I joined the Navy. I was a non-commissioned member. I was a radio teletype operator, which was one of the wartime trades. And although that was an operational trade, women could not go to sea. Not because we weren't capable, it was bad luck. And it was a tradition, and there were no ablution facilities, and everybody always went to the worst case scenario. So I joined, and as a non-commissioned member, my career opportunities and options were very limited. I would work in Mill Cove on the East Coast or Aldergrove on the West Coast forever. Couldn't go to sea. And after you'd been to each of those places a couple of times, then you could go to the message center in the dockyard, then you go back. So when I had the opportunity to go officer, I did that in the late 70s, and my choices were nurse, personnel admin, or logistics. And men who failed Mars became logistics. So again, society was like this. The options for women working outside the home were limited. My first uniform was a skirt and a short jacket designed by a Montreal designer who designed stewardess uniforms. And in fact, we looked very much like European flight attendants with the very rounded bowlers. We marched in the Wren's platoon because our skirts were so tapered we couldn't take the same size stride as a man. White gloves with our number ones. We had a lovely purse. No pockets in our uniform, so you had to have your ID card in your shoe or your bra if you didn't have your purse. But so was everyone else. Women did not wear trousers to work. So it wasn't so different. But finally, as people started to ask questions and they rose to the challenge, and people said, why not? And it wasn't just us in uniform, but people in society. So you have a lot of firsts. Those of us who are firsts don't like to ever be called firsts, and we're waiting for the day when people stop celebrating and saying, oh, look, they did this, and they're a woman. We don't say that about any other category. But I think that women going first and opening doors and normalizing that has made things possible for today's generation. Today's generation of service women don't have any limits. They have multiple choices. It's the same across society, but all of the changes took someone going first and someone asking, not why, but why not? When I did go to sea, I did Mars training as part of my sea logistics training, but we were in what we call the umbilical cord navy. So we would leave Victoria and we would sail in the small yard auxiliary class vessels to Maple Bay, take the bus back to Victoria, stay overnight, while the male crew stayed on board the ship. Then we'd take the bus the next day to Maple Bay and sail to Ladysmith, and then we would take the bus back to Victoria. That seems pretty dumb. It was a lot of bus time. But again, until someone said why, and they said, shut up, Bennett, we didn't question, neither did society. So I would say that across all sectors, it always takes someone first, someone taking that chance, and someone trusting in their abilities. For women, when we've done integration, women always had to work to prove themselves. There was a great deal of pressure and a great deal of focus when you were the first. Again, women not only had to prove that they could do the job, but that they would be successful in that. So some unique things about the military versus some of the other security sectors is that warrior ethos, that mentality, the physical aspects, but we've proven them wrong. And now we have gender-neutral physical fitness standards, because that's the right thing to do. In a fire, you can't say, oh, you pick up the girl fire extinguishers, you men pick up all the heavy things. You have to be able to trust, and there's that team esprit de corps. So we need to be fit to fight, fit for operations, not fit for you're this height, or you're this gender, or you're this build. And again, that has translated into other sectors of society, where firefighters, police, first responders. So I think it's been interesting to watch an incredible amount of evolution in my over 40 years, to see women who've stepped up, risen to the challenge, and opened doors, in some cases knocked down doors. I think we're still seeing that in a number of fields, but there's also critical mass now moving forward, which makes it easier for next generations.
Thank you. So I'm a bit of a first too, not quite in the same way. I'm the only woman on faculty at the Canadian Forces College, and I've worked there for more than a dozen years now. And I've had many conversations with officers that I work with and teach to the effect that there is no systemic problem, either in terms of sexual misconduct or more broadly discrimination. And just to give you a little bit of context, the very first time we did a gender and security activity in one of our security stream courses, which was 5 years ago. Ironically, it was a room full of men. Not that there weren't women in the stream, I just didn't have any in my classroom. And so one of the majors presented, and he basically implied that we'd sort of done and dusted. That was, yesterday's news. Everything was fine. And the following week, the Maclean's Actualité article came out. Now, this guy had the good grace to come back, put the magazine on the table and said, oops, I was wrong. And that led to a very interesting discussion. When Chief Warrant Officer Bélanger was here earlier today, she talked about the importance of leadership from the very top saying this stops now, referring to the change of command when General Vance took over as CDS. But how do you respond to, on the one hand, this pervasive thinking that there's not a problem, balance that with this stops now, and at the same time recognize that in the military you can order things, but how do you order cultural systemic change?
That's about 8 questions, so I'm going to unpack that.
I'm an academic. I get to do things like that.
That's okay. I hear I can do this. It's no harder than power in politics. So let me start by saying that the first step to admitting you have a problem or the first step to solving a problem is admitting you have that. There are 4 different types of people in our organization, and we recognize that they still exist. There are those who immediately believed and said, oh, I have waited so long for this. There's people who said, what took you so long? I've been here and no one paid attention. There's a third group that said, I haven't seen this, but a lot of people are saying, and they're the fourth that say, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. We will always have that. So no matter what the issue is, whether it's health-related issues, if you don't know anybody or you're not a smoker or you don't, then there isn't that buy-in. So no matter what the change agenda is, to sort of segue to that topic, first you need a vision for change and a clear end state. Now, we have the advantage in the military because we're used to that, where we have centers of gravity, we have, see, I went to staff college, we have missions, we have goals, we have end states, we have targets and achievables. I mean, that's all common language. So when I talk about change management, I use the example of kitchen renovations. So you start with a vision. You watch HGTV, you've seen all the shows, you go to the home improvement center, beautiful, we know what we want, the type of floor, we're going for the granite, we're going the farmhouse sink, you've got it all. This is great, we talk to the family around the table, this is going to be super, we talk to contractors and we start. And about 3 months in, as you're washing dishes in the garage with the hose, and you're having pizza again, you start to say, okay, why did we do this? This is really dumb, and you start to cut corners. And you try to expedite, and you say, okay, you know what? We don't really need the counters, bring in the old butcher block, don't worry about the floor, we're gonna do this. And then somebody has to take you back to the kitchen showroom and say, this is what it's gonna look like, and this is why we're doing this. And then a few months later, the contractor says, oh, yeah, not going to be ready for Christmas, and oh, it's double the price. You then justify, and again, you need a vision, you need the buy-in, because now other family members aren't on board and saying, this was dumb, you're making us do this, this was your idea, and then you blame each other. You have to keep going, and you have to know how this is going to look. And then when you speak to everyone and you go to their house and tell them how wonderful the kitchen is, they don't ever tell you about all those change of mind. They say, yes, it was hell, and it took a long time, and we had to wash dishes in the garage. But then those same people will renovate the bathroom, and then they will renovate another room. So again, if you have a vision, and everyone buys in, and you know what the mission is, and you can persevere through that. But as soon as you start to have negative voices and you have the people who question that, then it makes it really difficult. So in our case, people say, why an operation? Previous attempts were always corporate imperatives. Them. They are making us do this. And in our case, those of you who work for the government, it's Treasury Board. Them. They're the focus of blame. You know, travel, hospitality, all of this. It would be great if it were not for them. So you have to make it about us. So we had to describe and get buy-in on the bottom line. Why does this matter? I'm in an all-male regiment. There are no women here, we don't have an issue. But you're gonna have to step outside that box. You're gonna go to other places. I've never seen this. So in our language, it was the bottom line. This impacts operational effectiveness. This hits us right at our core principles, the esprit de corps, respect the dignity of all. This is wrong, and this is what, it's putting people at risk in an already risky job. And so in empowering and finding a way to illustrate this to everyone, and we have found, there was a wonderful article published in the Maple Leaf recently that's available online from a long-serving non-commissioned member who took one of our new training programs, and he was a non-believer. And he said, oh, you know, more training, this is great, another video, blah, blah. Sermon from the Mount, wallet card, I'm in. And he wrote an article that said, I now see why we cannot continue the way we were. why this is important to me, and I'm going to be a change agent in this. So there are non-believers, there are blind, there are people who don't see this, there are people who, again, perspective is everything, and in measuring our progress, it will be Canadian Armed Forces members who will decide if we're successful, because that's who it matters to. We will always have external critics, we will have the media doesn't publish all the happy stories about how great it is. Again, there will be critics who will look, but it's our members. And if you think in the point of view, if you've been a victim or a survivor and you've been waiting for this, you are looking for different measurables than somebody who says, well, okay, I hear what he's saying, I'm kind of buying in, this is the right thing to do. So again, you have to make it matter to people. It's very difficult, it's very challenging, we know there are non-believers. That's why we spent 2 years or more building the foundation of awareness and understanding. And it isn't just awareness of you have a problem, it's why does this matter? You have to have that empathy to see what is happening to our colleagues and how it goes across our culture. So I think, did I cover?
Yeah, I think you started to answer the next question, which is
that was like I planned it.
Well done. But I'm gonna hold you to your feet to the fire anyway. So given that the institution as a whole has to own success, then how does the senior leadership engage in terms of what those metrics of success might be? When does the current or a future CDS take their foot off the pedal?
Let me just add a point to my last one as well. I think another important thing, 85% of our organization are male. This is not a gender issue. This is not a women's issue. There's a great TED Talk with Jason Katz who talks about sexual harassment and sexual misconduct. It's not a women's issue. In fact, in our Statistics Canada survey, we have more male victims because more of the population is male. So I think that was also a wake-up call for people, because a lot of people say, oh, this is only happening to the women. A number of the victims who came forward in the 1980s, Maclean's articles, and in the 2014 L'Actualité and Maclean's were women. Victims' voices are also very powerful, and that compels you to take action. So Operation Honor is an enduring mission, and it won't matter who the CDS is. I know there was a question earlier about, is this General Vance's mission? Is this his agenda? And I think unfortunately as well, General Lawson sometimes gets a bad rap because he was initiating and had to start this. He's actually responsible for the response team, for hiring Madame Deschamps, for opening up our organization externally, because we did an internal study and we said, okay, none of our harassment surveys say this is bad, and yet we have all these people coming forward to tell their stories. We need to look at this more closely. The next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 CDSs are in the organization now, and they are embedded within Operation Honor, embedded into the culture change, the dynamic. This has momentum. This is not a mission that has a start and a stop date. People will always say, oh, when does this end? This is, for those of you that know our missions, this is like Operation Snow Goose. We went into Cyprus in the 50s. We're still in Cyprus. There's only a couple of people there now, but this is an enduring mission. There are rotos. We're in Roto 0, moving to Roto 1 in Operation Honor. Again, this is a never-ending campaign, and that's why you'll never hear us say zero tolerance. And people question General Vance when the mission of Operation Honor is to eliminate harmful and inappropriate sexual behavior. And people say, can you do that? Can you measure? But can you imagine if we stood up and said, okay, we're going to try and reduce by 10%. That's not acceptable. Like 10%. Or we're going to try and reduce. We're going to half. We're going to address. We're going to... He couldn't say anything but to say we're going to eliminate this. And that also sent a really powerful message about tolerance and about conduct. I think, so we're not taking our foot off the gas. What will change is we realize that there's also Operation Honor fatigue. People can only have so many sermon from the Mount, messages from the CO. This is also, we have a diagram that has a triangle where behavior is at the top. And if you address behavior, you have very transient impact. So you can just whack bad behavior, stop immediately. But below that are beliefs and values and culture and societal norms. And so we have some momentum now because this is not acceptable anywhere in society. We had our Me Too moment back with L'Actualité and Maclean's, followed by Madame Deschamps. But again, it's not, this is a journey of, this is a marathon. General Vance and I both say, and we've done about 5K, and it's going to get, it gets harder. So it is an enduring mission. It will continue. We're about to shift from this initial response to an institutional, a long-term campaign plan to embed this, much like we've done with some of the quality of life initiatives. There will be a standing organization, and also you can't address one form of behavior and say, okay, so you're not sexually harassing people, you're a bigot. That's okay, we're not fixing that. You know, you can't compartmentalize or say, okay, sexual harassment, but not harassment. Conduct and the values and principles of the Canadian Armed Forces are founded on that respect the dignity of all. So we have to address this not in a vacuum where we're looking at one single, or in a silo rather, in one single issue, but conduct writ large. What is acceptable? Membership has its privileges, not just for American Express, but in this organization. So we have conversations when people come to the recruiting center to say, here's our policy on social media, here's our policy on drug use, which is changing now with July coming. Here's our policy that you have to get up early, you have to shine your shoes, you have to wear a uniform. This is what it is. And in recruit training, we start to indoctrinate and to make people aware of that. We have to demonstrate as much about what right looks like as wrong. And so we need to reward people who do the right thing and to recognize and perpetuate that. So it is an enduring mission. It is an enduring aspect of our institution. It's also embedded across everything we do. So it isn't just today's Operation Honor Day, tomorrow will be green procurement, then it'll be diversity. See, I see the government people smiling. So in our ethics program, we have scenarios that involve Operation Honor related subjects. In our leadership, in sea training with the Navy, they have scenarios now that are part of the training of the ship's company. Pre-deployment training, in peace support operations, all of that, it's embedded in what we do, and so it needs to be commonplace. What was the first part of the question?
The first part of the cover was how do we measure success? Oh
yeah, how do we measure? Sorry. No, so this is kind of like when your children ask, are we there yet? Poor General Vance, he would love for me to go and give him great numbers and stats and facts. It's not that easy. When we did our first Statistics Canada survey and the results were coming out, General Vance said, it's not that bad, is it? I said, oh, buckle up, sir. But we didn't ask people, how many happy days did you have at work? How's the food in the mess? We asked them, have you experienced this? Have you, do you feel safe in this? We asked them hard questions because we needed to know. And I can't stand at the door of my office every day and say to people, did you have a better day today than you did yesterday? So how do you measure some of this? Some of it's anecdotal. We are doing a great deal of research. We're doing external and internal measures, data collection. We had no method before of tracking our data and analysis. We had systems in the military police, medical records, military justice, response. We had responses for harassment. We had responses for domestic violence. We had responses for families. We had no common look across that. And we've designed that in our Operation Honor tracking and analysis system. So again, we're not just monitoring this type of behavior, but looking writ large across grievances and complaints, conflict resolution, all forms of harassment and discrimination. And so we need to look and see whether things are getting better or worse. This is a really tough one because I'm excited when the number of reports go up. People say, what? Because that means people are coming forward. And everyone who has done this has found that reports increase dramatically. We've had cases dating back to the 70s, 1973, and we were able to successfully prosecute and lay charges and find people guilty. There is no statute of limitations on sexual-based offenses. We are demonstrating through our diligence and our vigilance and our transparency, victims and survivors are coming forward now trusting a system that they had no trust or faith in before. People are going directly to the military police. Our reports are more immediate now. 50% of the reports are within days or weeks, whereas we had within years. And we don't know what we don't know as well. So for us, the number of reports going up is a good sign. Number of convictions, charges related to sexual misconduct offenses has increased from 11% pre-Operation Honor to 33% now. And people say, aren't you horrified there are so many? No, I'm delighted because we're now more successfully prosecuting. So it's really hard because bad news becomes good news, but it takes a long time. And so we're about to repeat the Statistics Canada survey in this fall. The first survey gave us a baseline. Now this will be the critical one to show if we're making a difference. We continue to do unit morale profile, climate surveys, your say surveys to ask people, but it's a challenge to measure, and people want deliverables.
Okay, I'm going to make one general question, and then I want to talk a little bit more about you. It has to be an Admiral
question, because I'm not a general.
Oh, smackdown, mic drop. Okay. All right, I stand corrected. So there's quite a bit of confusion, I think, between things like United Nations Security Council 1325, which is, about women, peace, and security. And then there's a larger discussion, and I think Professor Sandra Whitworth alluded to this, about gender and security and the confusions that exist around these things. In public discourse, we know that the terms gender and women get regularly confused with each other and sometimes are used interchangeably. How can the CAF, but also I would say broader security organizations, we had a good conversation about the RCMP today as well, how can they respond to, on the one hand, the questions of women's representation at all levels, and on the other, about how security environments are deeply gendered? So how can we have those conversations, but also understand that they are different conversations?
I live that because I'm, in addition to my role with this strategic response team, I'm the champion for women in defense. That's an employment equity portfolio, and that came out of the targets that we have for the 4 designated groups, with the exception for the Canadian Armed Forces of persons with disability, but originally Aboriginal, but now Indigenous people, visible minorities, and women. So we started down this path with employment equity, and we used the term woman, and we knew what we were doing in terms of women's issues, and then people introduced in fora like gender-based analysis, which has been around for quite a long time. And that's another one that kind of got a bad rap because people immediately said, oh, this is about women's things. I said, no, it isn't. And when you look at gender, it isn't biology. And so then it was sort of, oh, well, what are gender considerations? Then we had some of the imperatives with women, peace, and security, which isn't actually about women. It's about women, girls, men, boys, the impact of operations and conflict. But again, it has the word women, and so people immediately default to biology. It's equally confusing for us. I think even the terms, whether people say, are you a lady? Are you a woman? Are you a female? What do we say? And now with gender fluidity, with new terminology, with all of the societal issues, it's even more confusing. So I think again we're looking at it from a couple of of spheres. One, there are gender dynamics for us in operations, and there are gender dynamics in the security and in intelligence sphere and role. And so how you use the term as opposed to just simply defining the biological, whether it's male, female, men, women, or again adding as people add to the pronouns or the descriptors. But gender is a larger issue and has larger implications and considerations. And I think you have to explain them instead of using those words. You have to give people examples. And for us, some of those lessons we stumbled upon. So having women and having an integrated force for us in terms of diversity. So we're not talking about it as a gender issue. Having a more diverse force is not just simply men and women, it's language ability, it's culture, it's how people's experience, because a more diverse workforce for all of us is a more effective workforce. We learned some incredible lessons, particularly in Afghanistan, by having a diverse force and by having women doing the things that Canadian Forces members do, as opposed to defining them by gender. That women and girls in societies in a number of the nations to which we deploy would speak with women. They wouldn't speak with the men. And particularly in countries where the military is feared, that women were more approachable. And we got incredible intelligence, and we increased our effectiveness and our efficiency because women could speak to women. And so when we would go into a village and it would be market day and the women would be at the market and the men would be doing men things, the women would be able to get intelligence and to be able to gather and get way more about what was happening than our traditional methods. There are also gender considerations. There's some amazing stories. We had a gender conference, and someone used the example about where we went into a village and we decided to dig a well, because they needed a well, and we picked a great spot up on the hill, and we dug the well, and this is super. And then we came back, and the well was all filled in. We said, hey, this was good. We redug the well. And then we discovered this kept happening. No one would use this well. But we didn't take into consideration this was the place where men, it was on kind of a plain and a plateau, and this is where men gathered. Women collected the water. Women couldn't go to where we had dug the well. Not because of what we had designed or developed. Oh, okay. But these are considerations within that community, within the society. There were gender considerations. There are all kinds of connotations that need to be considered, and I think, unfortunately, we keep trying to use the same traditional labels with that. So as we move forward and people understand, because there are no longer just two genders, as well as we have those discussions, some of it is moving from what has been traditional and traditional language, and I think there'll be a period of transition. But for all of us, you need to look at diversity as opposed to gender. You need to look at inclusion, and not just from the LGBTQ to us issues, but inclusion of everyone who's different. So for us, in terms of our uniform or our even our meal plan, when you looked at everything was fried in bacon fat, well, that doesn't work for a whole lot of either religious or cultural beliefs or even dietary. So it's more of those considerations about what people bring to the table, what they contribute, what are considerations in that. So I think there's confusion across diversity and inclusion. So diversity is about numbers and increasing representation, but inclusion is about making those numbers count. So again, I think in all of those terms, there's a new lexicon that we're using, and it doesn't neatly fall into the traditional thinking of biological terms. So each society is at a different stage of evolution as well, but I think integration is very important, not just, again, for men and women, but integration of skill sets, experience, ages, categories. So I agree that there is significant confusion, and we need to be talking about starting from sort of the ripples in a pond, talking about diversity and what a diverse workforce is, and then what that means. It isn't just simply based on gender.
Thanks for that. I know that in the military schoolhouse where I work, we are getting, I would say, much broader and more precise at the same time, if that doesn't sound too bizarre, in terms of our use of language. I walk into a classroom now where I teach mass atrocity, violence, and genocide, and I start out with, you know, all conflict is gendered. All violence is gendered in conflict, and that is to say we have to understand militarized masculinities, we have to address femininities, we have to address who are the perpetrators, who are the victims, and so on. So we can't really understand the phenomenon, as you said, unless we kind of widen the lens. So thank you so much for that. I'd like to turn the discussion away from being so broad and big and a little bit more towards you, because you're in an interesting place. After many decades in institutional leadership, you're now retiring. WIIS Toronto, who is a co-host of this event, we had the launch of our Toronto chapter just a few weeks ago. It may encourage you to know that in a venue where they thought, I think, about 30 people show up, we had how many people, Leah? About 130. And that was a very diverse and interesting crowd of people. I wish I could beam you to that crowd or beam that crowd to here, because what I would want to say is, what advice do you have for young women entering security-related professions, including but not limited to the military?
So I'm often asked about this, and it's funny because I didn't consider myself as sort of, you know, mentor, coach, or an influencer, but I realized in meeting people the power of what I call silent mentoring, or seeing is believing. And it's really important for people in any sphere or sector to be able to see themselves in that. So whether you wear a hijab and you don't know whether there will be other people, whether you have a disability or an ability, to see others who have that, to see women, if you are a woman in a male-dominated sphere. It's very powerful. And for those of us in senior and in institutional leadership roles, I think people need to be able to see, to aspire. So people like Chief Warrant Officer Belanger, who serves as an example for non-commissioned members, who see that someone has achieved that, or for those of us at these ranks. None of us set out to do this. It wasn't sort of on my resume. And people often ask, oh, did you aspire to be an admiral? And I said, no, those were black and white pictures of old guys. There were no women. I didn't, and I was busy being an ordinary Wren or a sub-lieutenant to sort of think that far ahead. But my advice would be the same across many spheres, and I've been asked to do convocation speeches and advice. And so first thing I think, in particular for women, is you don't need to be a man to be successful in a male-dominated profession. In fact, I would recommend that you stay true to yourself. Oscar Wilde had a great expression about, be yourself, everyone else is already taken. And I think that's really true. And women often find that they think they have to assume another persona to be successful, particularly in male-dominated roles or occupations and trades. It is funny that people in the forces, you know, people will drop an F-bomb and then apologize to me. And so I've used humor, and sometimes I'll say, oh, no, that's a term we use in the Navy. I'm familiar with that. That's not just an Army term or an Air Force. But it is funny that people still default. That's being polite. But it doesn't mean that I now have to drop an F-bomb. But we tend to think we need to be something else. And so I advise people, both men and women, to be yourself. Find your own leadership style, because under stressful situations, you need to default to that. And to remember what your center is. The other is to not limit yourself. There's some great advice from a number of folks who are in senior positions that we tend to self-limit ourselves. And I use the example of a Canadian Forces career versus a civilian career. In civilian careers, you open the Globe and Mail on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturday career section, and you eliminate jobs. You look and say, oh, no, that one's hard. Oh, that looks interesting, but and so you start to limit yourself. Much easier if someone sits beside Stefanie and says, oh, Stefanie, you'd be great for this. You should apply. Or a headhunter says, Stefanie, I want to interview you for this. Because Stefanie says, and women in particular, limit ourselves. In the Canadian Armed Forces, someone else manages your career. And so someone says, Jolene Lissy, you are ready to command. And Jolene goes, what? And the door shuts behind her, and next thing she knows, there she is. Because someone else knows you are ready, someone else knows you are prepared. So don't limit yourself, take chances. I'm where I am today, sometimes through circumstances and through kind of dumb luck. Doors opened, I wandered through, or I was pushed through, and that has led to where I am. So don't limit yourself, no matter what it is. Yes, there are really hard jobs. I've had a few. I have one now. But those are also really rewarding and incredible when you look back at that, and you have a chance to make a difference. So I think that's and the third piece, I borrowed from an example that was in Lean In from Sheryl Sandberg, that career paths don't have to be a ladder. Ladders are very limiting. Ladders only go up and down one person at a time, and usually you are looking at someone's butt above you, and they're in your way. The only way to get up is for that person to get off the ladder. So use the jungle gym approach. Jungle gyms, everybody can be successful. There are many routes to the top. You can have a rest along the way and you're not blocking someone. You can stand at that level and look for different routes and options and opportunities. You can watch others climb and see the route that they took. There's a timeout when you need it on a safe spot. And you don't have to get to the top. There's lots of lateral moves. So again, be creative about how you get there. You can take your time as necessary, and there are many routes. But I would say that, again, my three big pieces are: be yourself, find your true self in whatever style that is, and stick with that. Number two, don't limit yourself. Go for it. If options don't present themselves, then create your own. And the last piece is there are many routes to get to where you're going, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the top of the ladder.
Great advice. I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to collapse my last two questions because I'd like to give it a chance for people in the audience to ask you some questions as well. Your background is that as an educator, and you've also kind of grown your career as a career reservist. So given both of those roles, what advice do you have in terms of the cultural and component, or what information, enlightenment, about the cultural and component differences between the Reg Force and the Reserves? How can the Reg Force learn from the Reserves? And how could all of us learn from teachers?
Everything you need to know about life you learned in kindergarten. You know that. And people often ask me if I confused my two jobs, and I would often say that, you know, the kids at school love to march, but chiefs and POs don't like to hold hands and form a circle. It is funny because I do default to teacher mode, and for those of you that have worked with me and for me, even General Vance, when I work my magic and go back to sort of primary teacher, but I've benefited from both careers. In fact, my resume, I had some incredible job opportunities in the education field and was considered for leadership positions, not because of my teaching background, but because of the incredible amount of leadership training we have and experience. That's another really differentiating factor, that we just don't take the courses and sort of talk the talk. We walk the walk, and we have proven levels in which we exercise that. I was interviewed for one administrative position, and at the time I had a budget. I was running the cadet program, which is $216 million, and the headhunter said, "Is that a typo?" Because most teachers have a budget of $216, you know, for chalk and pens and things, and they said, "Million?" I said, "Yes." Like, you have to, and I said, "I don't have it in my drawer." So not like, "Oh, hello, Treasury Board, yes, here's the," but I'm responsible for that. And she said, "Wow, like, holy smokes." But again, this is, you know, those are the unique features of being able to combine this. And I think one of our challenges as as members of the Canadian Armed Forces, and some in the room will know from our work with the Canadian Forces Liaison Council, it's translating your skills. So you can't go into a civilian employer and say, I'm Master Bombardier Snuffy. Okay, what the heck is a Master Bombardier? That sounds really scary. And people are, that earlier question, there was the interesting question at the end of the last session about that Canadians don't really understand the Canadian Armed Forces. If you live in a city with a base, or you've seen the snowbirds, or you know, most people think of the Army. Lots of people inland don't realize we have a Navy. There is some confusion, and it isn't until people get to know us or that we show off. Our best recruiters are our own people. And when HMCS Toronto pulls in here to Toronto, to have a tour with Master Seaman Bloggins, who's an electrician, those are amazing people. And it isn't until we tell others about what we do that people realize the incredible, we are Canadians, we're your neighbors, we're the folks in your community. So I think for reservists, what's been really interesting is the regular force, there is not as much cultural difference now, certainly between the primary reserve. The primary reserve, we used to be the after-supper soldiers and sailors, or, you know, we did it to ourselves as well, because people would say, oh, are you regular force? And we'd say, no, I'm just a reservist. Well, you work twice as hard, as say Winston Churchill said, twice the citizen. But we bring to the table unique skills, and it was an interesting example. I was at Armed Forces Council, and we were talking about the physical fitness standards in the program. And I started to launch off, my background is in kinesiology. And so I was challenging the kinesiologists and the physiologists about questions. And then my colleagues around the table are going, like looking for my notes, saying, would you have the greens? Like, where are you reading this from? And I said, no, I do this in my civilian life. And they said, really? Wow, that's so interesting. Or when someone on a mission suddenly launches into Farsi, and they say, what? Didn't know. Because we don't have, our military resumes have 2 boxes for language, English and French. But reservists come to the table with all kinds of skills. The Winnipeg floods, our most valuable people were people who worked for the city of Winnipeg, who knew where all the sewers were, even though there was feet of water above them. Firefighters, police. We bring unique skills that are very complementary to the Canadian Armed Forces. And I think sometimes we don't sort of toot our own horn. You can be on board a ship and speaking to the helmsman, who's actually an orthopedic surgeon in his real life, but is a bosun, because he wants to do something different. You can speak to a cook, and she is the CEO of a multinational corporation, but she loves to do this on Tuesday nights. So again, I think we bring, I'm going back to a previous theme, diversity to an organization and skill sets that the Canadian Armed Forces is only now discovering. So I think the culture, there's been a huge shift. Part of it was that we paid our dues, and it took the war to do that. So in Bosnia, we started to deploy reservists, not as single augmentees, but in rifle companies, in larger groups. In Afghanistan, at one point up to 30% of the deployed forces were reservists. At the Olympics in Vancouver, we had an incredible influx of part-time reservists who brought military and civilian skills in our civil-military cooperation. Again, we've proven ourselves side by side, and sadly, we brought home our colleagues with Canadian flags over their caskets, part-time and full-time members of the Canadian Armed Forces, men and women. So we leveled the playing field. We proved ourselves, much like women have had to do. Reservists stepped up. There was always the question, people would say, well, will they show up? In fact, we showed up in twice as many, double the numbers that were required. And we brought the professional skills with us. So I think that's sort of been interesting, but it has evolved. Certainly my career as a reserve, I was surprised when people say, oh, I didn't know you were a reservist, which is funny, because I think now you can't tell, aside from our ID cards that do say reserve, but even that is changing now. I think, again, as a teacher, I was able to use my military skills, even the conflict resolution. When you got a really angry preschool child. It works good for conflict resolution. But at the same time, my leadership, my presence in an emergency, my staff, when I was a principal and a head of school, my staff were always amazed that under pressure, I was very calm, cool, collected, and it would sort of be, situation, mission, execution, service, support, command, and signal. The secretary used to laugh because I would use words like, I'm going to task you with, and I would speak in operational language. One of my favorites was when the secretary came to give me a message once, and she said, Warren called. I said, Warren who? Oh, it was a hyphenated last name. Warren, Officer Gallant. I said, what was the last name? Officer Gallant. I said, oh, that would be Warrant Officer Gallant. And also I said, if anyone named Admiral or General calls, I'll take that call. But again, it was unique because my civilian community got to know the military through me. My students, I wore my uniform to school. For Remembrance Day, I spoke about my service. I think opportunities for Canadians to get to know us better and for the regular force to better understand the reserve have been really, really helpful. And as I said, I think that as more people are integrated and deploying and working side by side, people are realizing the benefit of a diverse force.
Wow. You certainly do embody your own description, which is that the best recruiters are our members. So I think you embody that very nicely. And as a segue to that... I can
swear you in over in the side there.
No, it's okay. As a segue to the audience, please, if you have any questions for Admiral Bennett about some of the substantive issues or about her own career, then please come on forward.
Master Bombardier retired.
There you go, Master Bombardier. I know what a Master Bombardier is. Hands up, anyone else who knows what a Master Bombardier. There you go, good.
Oh, yeah.
There is no mic.
Here. You can have one of these. Here, we'll give you one.
Right over here. Right over there.
There is no mic.
There you go, man. Okay.
Hang on to it, Colin.
So, quick questions. I'm so proud to be in a room with a senior officer, a reservist. Our organization, Career Edge, have just spent the last 3 years in a pilot project in partnership with the Department of National Defense, helping reservists find civilian roles. And to my dismay, 3 years ago, when I spoke with the Department of National Defense and talked about a project and helping reservists gain employment, we thought that we'd have a real, pardon my language, a bugger of a time finding employers interested in hiring reservists. Mm-hmm. Well, here I am, 2.5, 3 years later, I'm telling you, furthest from the truth. I couldn't find reservists to fill roles in which civilian employers want to fill. Matter of fact, the ratio about 9 to 1. I have 90 roles on my board. Any given time, want to hire reservists because they saw the value, and we sold the value of these reservists. The reservists didn't come forth. So in that process, and you touched on a little bit about the military resume, all kinds of government money and very, very smart people have tried to say we can use software, we can use artificial intelligence to turn a military resume into a civilian resume. I personally don't agree with that. I don't think it's possible in the near future. We found the biggest problem was convincing a regular force and reservist member to spend the time at the table to translate the resume. We had a lot of fight back resistance. I would like to hear your comments on what could we as a civilian organization do differently to convince reservists and regular force members to spend the time working at the table with whomever to translate that. Why is there pushback?
So have you worked with the Canadian Forces Liaison Council?
CFLC, know very well, Colonel Dirk Schiff.
So, we developed tools, and we've had those through our employer support programs in the reserve. I say our programs; they used to be my programs, but through the Canadian Armed Forces. Even in writing cover letters and how to describe experience, and we had real simple checklists for commanding officers, because that's one step. Is as a commanding officer, how do you write a letter of reference for Master Bombardier Snuffy, who you say he commands a company and he does it. So again, using words like small party task. that's all Armed Forces lingo. So there are some tools that exist, and if they, I have a box of them if they aren't still available, that we had a binder that had all kinds of tools about that, developing resumes. I think there's also lots of civilian software and products, but it starts from within. So I go back to seeing is believing. So you need some advocates of that who are reservists. It's also good to speak with reservists who've used headhunting, executive search firms, people who have worked on translating the resume. I know myself, I've offered to a lot of my regular force colleagues who are retiring to show them my resume and to help them to build theirs. So I think you have to do it from inside as well. Find some advocates, find some people who can do that. There are a number, we did some programs with equivalencies through Red Seal, through apprenticeship programs. There are some tools that exist for a number of the trades, in particular for NCM, to also identify gaps. But I think you need to have us speaking to us. So find and plant the seed. It has worked with honorary colonels who've worked within regiments rather, to help build resumes. But find the people and start with them and make them advocates of that. I think the other is that it's taken a long time, and I look around the room at my colleagues and friends I've served with, that it's taken a long time for us to be proud and for Canadians to better understand the military. Sadly, again, as I say, Afghanistan and the Highway of Heroes and some of this, that now Canadians better understand and appreciate. But it starts from those leadership principles, the executive skills, even those simple tasks, and how we translate those. But I would recommend and suggest start from within. Find our own advocates, because when one of your colleagues or your peers speaks about their experience and how successful it is, then people understand that better. That's just my advice.
Any final questions? Leah, go for it.
Thank you very much, Admiral Bennett, for your very important work and your very important comments this evening. I'm sorry to pick up on something I suppose a bit negative, but I wanted to ask if you might say a little bit more about some of your remarks earlier in the conversation about the power of individual stories, and on looking to the anecdotes of women, primarily, victims, to spur action. And if you could say a little bit more about that, please. Sure.
There are, it's always more powerful through experiential, no matter what it is, when someone comes forward and speaks about their own experience. We are trying to empower victims and survivors to come forward to share their stories for several reasons. One, we can learn from that, but we can also help to turn around some of the non-believers. Empathy is a great thing, to see yourselves or to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. But it's very difficult because people are at different stages of their healing. It's also important that some people had positive support, and those are equally important, and we're not trying to cover the negative, but it's important for people to hear and to have people to come forward who say, I was supported, I struggled, and I did this, and this happened, as much as it is the others. Sexual trauma is quite different than operational stress or combat-related PTSD. There are risk factors about re-victimization and people coming forward. It requires, again, a different level of care and support, but it is incredibly powerful. We are working towards things aligned with the Canadian Victims' Bill of Rights. We're looking at creating that type of instrument within the Canadian Armed Forces, victim impact statements at trials, doing restorative justice and community-related healing where people speak up. It is very powerful, but it's also a very difficult and a misunderstood and a very personal journey for people, so we need to protect and ensure people are at that stage. I've been on the hot seat in media interviews. One of the particularly most powerful CBC radio did an interview in which they had a victim speak first, Sergeant Cox, who is a serving member. They had me speak, they had Madame Deschamps, they had another lawyer. And it's hard because you know, what can I say? Maybe, well, Admiral Bennett, what are you doing about that? And someone's just told their story. It's the same with the news. Someone's house is burned down. Well, how do you feel about that? You know, how do you think they feel? So it's an important tool for the individual as well. It can be cathartic. There's a difference where victims are saying they need peer support, but in fact, peer support for sexual trauma victims is very risky because people, you need some professional help and guidance, otherwise the conversations can re-victimize people. There isn't a lot of study about the effectiveness of that. What people need is a community of support, and part of that begins by telling your story. There are some who want to share their story, there are others who don't, and even for them reporting. What we're trying to do is limit the number of times that they have to describe and go through that, because it can re-victimize. And it's still a crime in which there's victim blaming. I don't know if Chief Warrant Officer Boulanger, she has a great anecdote. I'll steal hers since she stole mine earlier. She talks about different types of crimes and victimizing. So if you have a break and enter at your house and you call police, the police don't arrive and stand in your driveway and go, oh yeah, look at your house. You have no curtains on your front windows. You can see right into the living room. You got a big screen TV. You got nice furniture. You got a car here. You're probably on your Facebook site, said you were on holiday. They don't question that. If you lose your wallet, they don't say, oh, what were you wearing? Were you wearing pants where the pocket, it might have fallen out of your pocket? They don't question the victim. They deal with the crime. But in sexual-based offenses, there's still a question about, where were you? What did you do? Also different for men and women, and very difficult for male victims because there's still that question of sexuality. In our research, we found that in the Canadian Armed Forces, male victims the perpetrator is most often a peer, and for women, it's a supervisor or someone in a superior position. So again, we are working towards an engagement strategy, both for the healing for victims, the power of that story, but it's not just those type of victims. Victim impact statements are very powerful for the community, and when you're looking, in our case, where trust and esprit de corps and teamwork, for someone to be able to stand up and say, you know, nobody did anything and this happened to me, again, how you handle that, but it needs to be done differently. For certainly operational stress, in our peer support, people don't talk about the incident. They don't talk about the IED or the accident. They talk about the symptoms and what happened from there, whereas victims of sexual violence or sexual-based offenses want to talk about what happened because that gives them control. So again, we're looking at how do we capture those stories. There are some very powerful movies. We had RDI have a documentary called Les Femmes au Combat that has victim testimonials. In the United States, The Invisible War, they're extremely powerful in changing people's minds and to see themselves in others. And so we're carefully pursuing that.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm, yes, indeed, the founder of Women in International Security Canada and also an associate professor at Queen's University. And I've just had the best time tonight and throughout the day. First, when I looked at the program, I noticed that my session, the closing remarks, didn't have a specified end time. And so I interpreted that to mean I could take as much time as I liked. But Rear Admiral Bennett is a very difficult act to follow. And I've always admired Admiral Bennett, but I never realized until tonight how brilliantly funny she is. And so I will keep my remarks really short, because I can't compete with that, in all honesty. As I was sitting today also in the room, I was trying to find a common thread through the presentations, because we covered a lot of ground, and I think you can agree that the panels brought a lot of diversity in terms of topics covered. And to me, the common thread is really how biases affect national security and international security, from machine bias in artificial intelligence to biases in our institutions and policies, and biases in the way that we assess threats and come up with solutions. And I think now, looking back on the program, that was really brilliantly designed. So let me commend the organizers for not only the way that they crafted the sessions, but also picking such eloquent participants to present their research and share their expertise. And I think that the best way to tackle bias, whether it's in assessing threats to critical infrastructure or assessing, the way that we think about how our conflict resolution approaches affect men and women differently, what's key, I think, is awareness. It's that aha moment that you get when you really understand that you can broaden the lens and consider more factors that impact decision making. And I think that awareness piece is made most compelling by the evidence-based research and by the stories. And I think there was lots of that today, which I think certainly informed my thinking. But there will always be these non-believers, as Admiral Bennett said, and that's why I want to thank especially the RCMI for partnering with WIIS Canada, because it's the first partnership of this kind, I think, for both institutions. And when I look in the room, I see a very diverse group of people, both in terms of backgrounds, in terms of age, in terms of race and ethnicity. And I'm really proud to see that we can have those conversations, because WIIS Canada has typically focused on bringing women together from different sectors, from students to experienced professionals. And I think it's really important to have those conversations about gender awareness and gender biases across the board with a lot of different stakeholders around the table who are open to this kind of these kinds of questions. So raising those questions and providing a platform to raise those questions is what I want to thank the RCMI for. So thank you very much for partnering with WIIS Canada. In the process of asking those questions, we become better analysts, we become better students, and we become better service members. And I think if we were going to extend the conversation even further, we could also look at how sometimes our adversaries use our own gender biases against us. I was really struck by research that's been done recently on how ISIS has exploited the fact that we don't associate terrorists with women to recruit female participants and then gain 8 times the media coverage, for instance. You can't buy that kind of publicity. So you have incredibly interesting research that is showcasing just the way that biases are exploited and how they can undermine our performance in a variety of contexts. So with that said, I also wanted to give a shout out to our volunteers, because we get to enjoy the day, but months and months of planning go into an event like today. And a very personal thank you on behalf of WIIS Canada and the board to Caroline Prince and Leah Sarson, who really have worked tirelessly in the past months in really collaborating with the RCMI and lending their expertise to this event. So thank you both from WIIS Canada. Finally, just my final word would be about this gender-women distinction, because women don't have the monopoly over gender-based analysis. And I really hope that one of the takeaways from today is little tools about how to ask questions that allow you to perform that gender analysis. We all feel more comfortable maybe with doing needs-based analysis or risk analysis. Maybe that comes more intuitively. And I think that with the expertise today that was shared, I hope that all of us feel better equipped to raise those types of questions, and it shouldn't always be the women raising those questions. So thank you once again. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you to our last panelist of the evening as well for staying through until the end. And I look forward to crossing paths with all of you in the near future. Thank you and good night.